He opened the security app, expecting to catch her breaking protocol. 11 maids before her had failed, stolen from him, lied to him, left his sons more broken than they found them. So when Lorenzo Whitlock saw those twin beds sitting empty in the middle of the playroom, his blood ran cold. Then he saw them, his two silent sons, Ethan and Aiden, the boys who hadn't spoken a word in 3 years, standing frozen in the corner, and Caroline, the new maid, moving toward them with something in her hands that made his stomach drop. Lorenzo's phone nearly slipped from his grip. His back hit the wall. And the man who trusted no one, who controlled everything, watched his worst fear materialize on a screen in his own fortress. He had minutes, maybe less. Hit subscribe like you mean it. Smash that like button. Drop a comment right now telling me where in the world you're watching from. I want to know how far this message is reaching places where you feel alone. Let me know you're there. Do it now, before you scroll away and forget. 3 years ago, Lorenzo Whitlock lost the only person who made him believe the world had mercy in it. His wife, Isabella, was taken. Not by a rival family, not in a hit. She was kidnapped by men Lorenzo had never even crossed. Men who thought a mafia boss's wife was worth $5 million and an easy escape route out of the country. They were wrong about the escape. Lorenzo found them in 48 hours. What he did to them after that became a ghost story in the underground, a warning that played on loop in every dark corner of his world. But he didn't find Isabella in time. By the time he kicked down that warehouse door, gun raised, Marcus at his side, she was already gone. No final words, no goodbye. Just a cold concrete floor and a truth that shattered him. He hadn't protected her, and worse, she'd been 4 months pregnant. The only mercy left in the world came 2 weeks later when Isabella's sister arrived at his door, holding the hands of 2 small boys, twins, Ethan and Aiden, 7 years old, pale, hollow-eyed, and silent. "They haven't spoken since the funeral," she said quietly. "The doctors say it's trauma. Selective mutism, stress-induced. They just freeze when they're scared now, Lorenzo. Like their bodies shut down." Lorenzo looked down at those boys, his nephews, his responsibility, his last connection to Isabella, and made a promise. No one would ever hurt them. Not while he was breathing. The mansion became a fortress. 23 cameras, motion sensors on every door, biometric locks, panic buttons in every room. Marcus Ellington, his right-hand man, ran security like it was a military operation. Helen Carter, the house manager, kept everything sterile, controlled, safe. And the boys? They lived like ghosts in their own home. They didn't play, didn't laugh, didn't speak. They sat in their room, staring out the window, 2 small bodies holding on to a silence that Lorenzo couldn't break no matter how many therapists he flew in or how much money he spent. He watched them on the cameras, always watching, because control was the only thing that kept the nightmares away. Then came the caregivers, 11 in 18 months. The first one quit after 2 weeks. Said the boys were too unsettling. The second was caught going through Lorenzo's office. The third tried to sell information about the twins to a journalist for $6,000. Lorenzo fired her on the spot and installed 3 more cameras. One caregiver faked her credentials. Another was caught on camera shoving Aiden when he wouldn't eat. A 6th stole prescription medication from the medical cabinet and vanished. Each one came with a polished resume and a warm smile. Each one left with Lorenzo's trust bleeding out a little more. He stopped seeing people. He saw risks, threats, lies wrapped in kindness. He reviewed every second of footage, rewound, zoomed in, studied facial expressions like he was reading enemy intelligence. Because in his world, everyone had an angle. Everyone wanted something. Control became his religion. Surveillance became his prayer. So when Caroline Vance walked through his front door, 29 years old, quiet, composed, with those unnervingly warm hazel eyes, Lorenzo didn't see a person. He saw the 12th failure waiting to happen. No improvising, he told her, not looking up from her background check. No emotional attachment, no bedtime stories or bonding moments. You follow the medical schedule exactly. The boy's therapist has made the prognosis clear. They need structure, routine, nothing more. Caroline nodded. I understand. But she didn't understand. Or maybe she understood too well, because Caroline didn't follow his rules. She hummed softly while she folded their clothes. She rearranged their toys so they faced the window instead of the wall. She read to them even though they never responded, her voice low and steady. Like she believed they could hear her, like she believed they could heal. And Lorenzo watched it all. At first, he watched to catch her breaking protocol. Then he watched because he couldn't look away, because something was happening in that house. Something small at first. Ethan smiled when she hummed his favorite melody. Aiden's fingers twitched when she held his hand during breakfast. Both boys turned their heads toward her voice when she entered the room, something they hadn't done for anyone in 3 years. Lorenzo told himself it meant nothing. He told himself hope was dangerous. He told himself the doctors knew best. But late at night, alone in his office, with the blue glow of monitors lighting his face, Lorenzo watched a woman fight for his sons with nothing but patience and belief. And somewhere deep in his chest, in a place he thought had died with Isabella, something started to crack. He didn't trust it. He couldn't. Because hope, when you've buried it that deep, doesn't feel like relief. It feels like a trap. But before we go any further, hit that subscribe button like this video and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. If you've ever felt like trusting again was too dangerous, like believing in kindness might destroy you, this story is for you. Because sometimes mercy doesn't ask for permission. It just shows up when you have minutes to act. The mansion woke up the same way every morning. Quiet. Not peaceful quiet, the kind that pressed against your chest like a hand you couldn't see. Lorenzo stood at his office window, espresso growing cold in his hand, watching the sun climb over the east gate. The groundskeeper was already out there, trimming hedges that no one walked past anymore. The fountain in the courtyard hadn't run in 8 months. Lorenzo kept meaning to call someone. He never did. Behind him, 3 monitors glowed against the dark wood paneling. Living room, hallway, the twins' bedroom. There they were, Ethan and Aiden, still asleep in their matching beds, small bodies barely making dents in the expensive sheets. Helen would wake them soon. Give them breakfast they wouldn't finish. Dress them in clothes they wouldn't wrinkle because they barely moved. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. 3 years of silence. 3 years of watching his nephews exist inside their own heads like prisoners he couldn't reach. The house was too big. 27 rooms for a man who only used 4. His office, his bedroom, the kitchen when he remembered to eat, and the security room when the nightmares kept him awake. Everything else felt like a museum, preserved but lifeless. He'd bought this place for Isabella. She loved old estates, the stone walls, the iron gates. She said it felt like a home that could protect a family. Now the only protection Lorenzo trusted came from motion sensors and cameras, from Marcus running the perimeter checks twice daily, from Helen's rigid schedules that kept the twins in routine so predictable that any deviation would trigger an alert on his phone. Control was the only thing that kept the nightmares away. Lorenzo set the espresso cup down and walked to his desk. The monitors showed different angles of the same truth. 2 small boys trapped in silence, and a man who'd built a fortress that couldn't save them from what lived inside their heads. The intercom crackled. "Sir, Ms. Vance is here for her first day." Lorenzo's eyes stayed on the screens, on Ethan's blank stare, on Aiden's clenched fists even in sleep. "Send her to my office," he said. "It's time to lay down the rules." Caroline Vance entered the office like someone who'd learned to take up less space than she needed. Her steps were quiet, measured. She wore a simple gray maid's dress with a white apron, her brown hair pulled back in a neat bun. When she stopped in front of Lorenzo's desk, her hands folded naturally in front of her, not fidgeting, not performing calm, just still. Lorenzo didn't look up from the file in front of him. Caroline's file. He'd already read it 3 times, cross-referenced her references, run a background check that went back to her high school volunteer work. Clean. Too clean, maybe. "Sit," he said. Caroline sat in the chair across from him, her posture straight, but not rigid. She didn't look around the office, didn't stare at the monitors behind him showing every corner of the house. That was good. The ones who stared too long at the cameras were usually the ones planning something. Lorenzo finally looked up, his ice-blue eyes locking onto hers. She met his gaze without flinching, without the false confidence that usually signaled lies. Just steady, calm. "You've read the file on the boys," he said, not a question. "Yes, Mr. Whitlock." "Then you know what you're walking into. Ethan and Aiden are 7 years old. They haven't spoken in 3 years. Selective mutism triggered by trauma. When they're frightened or overwhelmed, they freeze, completely, like their bodies shut down." He paused, letting the weight settle. "The doctors call it a stress-induced catatonic response. I call it a nightmare." Caroline nodded slowly. "I understand." "Do you?" Lorenzo leaned back in his chair. 11 caregivers before you thought they understood. The first one quit after 2 weeks because watching them was too depressing. The second spent more time taking selfies than actually caring for my nephews. The third tried to sell photos of their medical equipment to a tabloid. He watched Caroline's face for a reaction. Nothing changed. No shock, no judgment, just that same steady attention. "Others stole from me," Lorenzo continued. "Medication, money, information. One accessed my financial accounts and disappeared with $40,000. Another was caught on camera." He gestured to the monitors behind him. "Pushing Aiden when he wouldn't eat fast enough." Now something flickered in Caroline's eyes. Not fear, anger. Quick and controlled, but Lorenzo saw it. "So you'll forgive me, Ms. Vance, if I don't trust easily." He pulled a single sheet of paper from the file and slid it across the desk. "These are the rules, non-negotiable." Caroline picked up the paper, her hazel eyes scanning the typed list. Caregiver protocol, Whitlock residence. 1. Follow the daily schedule exactly, no deviations. 2. No physical contact beyond necessary care, feeding, bathing, dressing. 3. No singing, storytelling, or attempts at emotional bonding. 4. No moving furniture or changing room arrangements. 5. No leaving the house with the children under any circumstances. 6. No visitors. No phone calls during working hours. 7. All activities are monitored via security cameras, no exceptions. 8. Report any changes in the children's behavior immediately to Mr. Whitlock or Helen Carter. Caroline set the paper down. "May I ask a question?" Lorenzo's jaw tightened. 1. The boy's therapist, what does she recommend for their treatment? Structure, routine, predictability. Lorenzo's voice was flat. The trauma fractured their sense of safety. The only way forward is to build an environment so controlled, so consistent, that their nervous systems can eventually trust it. Emotion is chaos. Chaos is what broke them. Caroline was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I understand, Mr. Whitlock." Good. Lorenzo stood, signaling the end of the conversation. "Helen will show you the schedule and the twins' rooms. You start immediately. Your first shift ends at 6. Marcus will let you out through the east gate." Caroline rose from her chair. She picked up the protocol sheet, folded it carefully, and tucked it into her apron pocket. "One more thing," Lorenzo said as she reached the door. She turned back. "I watch everything, Miss Vance. Every room, every moment. If you step out of line even once..." His eyes were cold steel. "You're done. No second chances, no explanations. You leave, and you never come back. Caroline held his gaze for a breath longer than the others ever had. I wouldn't expect anything less, she said quietly. Then she walked out, the door closing softly behind her. Lorenzo stood alone in his office, watching the monitors as Caroline appeared in the hallway camera feed. Helen was already waiting for her, clipboard in hand, leading her toward the east wing where the twins spent their days. He sat back down and pulled up the live feed from their playroom. Ethan and Aiden sat in identical positions on the floor, building blocks scattered around them but untouched. They stared at different corners of the room, lost in whatever silent world they'd retreated to. Lorenzo's hand tightened around his cold espresso cup. 12 caregivers, 12 chances, 12 failures. Caroline Vance would be no different. He'd make sure of it. Lorenzo's mornings followed a pattern. Wake at 5:45, espresso by 6 was, monitors on by 6:15. By the time the rest of the house stirred to life, he'd already reviewed 12 hours of overnight footage at double speed, scanning for irregularities, threats, anything out of place. On Caroline's fourth morning, he found something. The timestamp read 7:23 a.m., the twins' playroom. Caroline had just finished helping Aiden into his chair for breakfast. Standard protocol. Then she did something that made Lorenzo's finger hover over the intercom button. She hummed. It was quiet, barely audible over the security feed's audio, but unmistakable. A soft melody as she arranged their plates, set out their utensils, poured their water. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. Rule 3. No singing, storytelling, or attempts at emotional bonding. He reached for his phone to call Helen, then paused. On the screen, Ethan's head had tilted slightly, just a few degrees. His eyes tracked Caroline's movement across the room, the first time Lorenzo had seen him follow anything with his gaze in weeks. Lorenzo sat back. He didn't delete the footage. He marked it, flagged it for review. The next day, he found another violation. Caroline was in the playroom again, this time folding laundry. The twins sat on the floor surrounded by toy cars, the same cars that had been positioned facing the wall since they'd arrived 3 years ago. The therapist said it reduced overstimulation. Lorenzo had never questioned it. Caroline picked up one car, then another, and she turned them around, all of them, facing the window, facing the light. Lorenzo's blood simmered. Rule 4. No moving furniture or changing room arrangements. His hand was already reaching for his phone when he saw it. Ethan was looking at the cars. Not past them, not through them, at them. His small hand reached out, fingers stretching toward the red one closest to him. He didn't pick it up, didn't play with it, but he reached. Lorenzo's call to Helen died in his throat. He sat in his office chair, watching the screen, watching his nephew do something so small it shouldn't have mattered. But it did. It mattered more than Lorenzo wanted to admit. On day 7, Caroline committed her third violation. Lorenzo caught it on the evening footage. The twins were getting ready for bed, a process that usually involved mechanical routine, pajamas, teeth, bed, no variance, no conversation. But Caroline knelt down beside Aiden's bed and did something the others never had. She touched his shoulder, gently, just her hand resting there for 3 seconds while she looked at his face. "You did good today," she said quietly. "I'm proud of you." Aiden didn't respond, didn't react, but he didn't pull away either. Then Caroline moved to Ethan's bed and did the same thing. Hand on shoulder, 3 seconds. "You're so brave, both of you." Lorenzo's finger hovered over the intercom, over Helen's contact, over the email draft he'd already prepared. Termination effective immediately. Rule 2. No physical contact beyond necessary care. 3 violations in 7 days. That was his threshold. 3 strikes and they were gone. Always. He should fire her. He should call her into his office right now and end this before she got comfortable, before she thought the rules didn't apply to her. Before, on the monitor, Ethan's hand moved. Slowly, uncertainly. His small fingers reached up and touched the spot on his shoulder where Caroline's hand had been. Like he was trying to keep the warmth there, like he was trying to remember what it felt like to be touched with kindness instead of clinical necessity. Lorenzo's hand fell away from the phone. He sat in the blue glow of his monitors, watching footage of a woman who was breaking all his rules and somehow making his nephews more alive than they'd been in 3 years. Every instinct screamed at him to stop this, to fire her, to restore order and control before something went wrong. But that small hand on that small shoulder, trying to hold on to 3 seconds of gentleness. Lorenzo couldn't press the button. Not yet. He told himself it was because he wanted more evidence, more data, more certainty before making a decision. But late that night, when he reviewed the footage again in the dark, he knew the truth. He wasn't watching Caroline to catch her failing. He was watching because he was terrified she might succeed. And if she did, if kindness could reach his nephews where control had failed, then every choice Lorenzo had made for 3 years had been wrong. That thought kept him awake until dawn.